So the first deal I bought was $38,000, upstate New York, Syracuse. I was in New York City. It's 2012. I had a bit of cash saved. Remember, I mentioned earlier that I'd already been bitten by the real estate bug prior to moving to the US. And it just, when I got here, I didn't have a ton of money saved. I saved for my corporate job. Spent half of it moving across the bloody halfway across the world. Paying some brokerage fee to rent a unit in New York City was crazy. But whatever I had left over, I said to myself, okay, well, the banks aren't lending to me. Where can I go pay all cash? And I found these secondary, tertiary markets, right? And that's the whole story of the United States is why it makes it such an interesting investing landscape, is that you have the major cities like New York, Chicago, Miami, San Francisco, LA, really growth markets. Then you have these other markets that people need to live in, right? Because you have 350 million people who live in this country, and there needs to be other places to live. So there's secondary and tertiary markets, which are a lot cheaper. And we don't have that in Australia. We just don't have the population that drives that secondary and tertiary market type of, on the scale that you have here in the United States. So coupled with the lending, incredible lending for multifamily, I was able to buy my first property, all cash, $38,000, upstate New York. It was the most amount of units I could buy with $38,000, which was a triplex. And I learned pretty quickly Section 8 housing. Didn't know anything about it, but learned, hey, this looks freaking good on paper. Let's go out and get my first deal done. So you asked the question of what do you need to do? Your listeners are bitten by the bug. I personally always have said on multiple of these podcasts, you got to go out and test the waters yourself. And what I mean by that is I knew I wanted to do real estate, but I always knew I wanted to be in the driver's position of being an operator, right? I always knew that I just wanted to own deals. So I needed to prove it to myself. And I needed a few little deals on the board to say, hey, I can do this. And my first 3 or 4 deals were really my own. And that helped me prove it to myself, right? Everyone goes on this journey and wants to get involved in real estate. They go to meetups, they meet people, they educate, they listen to podcasts and read books and do after hours work on the weekends and stuff. And getting that first deal done is a real pat on the back to say, yeah, I figured this out. I figured out the system. And then obviously, so from there, I've scaled it. But to start with, it's really about proving it to yourself before you go out and start raising money and doing a bigger deal.
And how much real estate have you transacted up to this point?
Well, it transacted both closing and sold over $650 million to date.
So you went from that triplex $38,000 cash offer to over $650 million worth of real estate transactions. And you talk about getting started, right? And you can't compare your day one to someone else's day, 1,000. And we say this so you understand and have context that this is not to say that, hey, Reed's at $650 million, you can do it too. If you want to do that, it's possible, but we all start somewhere and you have to do that first deal. And there are clues in the process of most successful investors of what they've done to be successful. And you've talked about, you got to get started. You got to take that leap of faith. You've got to do that first deal, learn for yourself, prove out the model, make sure that you understand what you're doing, learn, and then you can grow and scale. And I just think it's really important for people to understand that you're never going to know 100% of everything. Things are going to go wrong. Things are not going to go exactly as you had anticipated. But if you can get started and not lose everything on a deal, you can start to build, learn from that, and continue to get better and better. Talk about that transition for you. As you went from that 3-unit into syndication. What were some of the lessons you learned and some of the improvements that helped you scale up?
Well, I think in general, for the listeners out there, the timeline is 2012, land, educate. Oh my God, the real estate investment associations, which are across every single MSA, that doesn't exist in Australia. That doesn't exist in Europe. That doesn't exist in Canada. Take those with both hands and get involved in your local RIA. So that's the first lesson. The second lesson in the timeline, I bought the first property, then was able to buy a second property, and then bought a third property, all roughly around $30,000, $40,000 each over a period of about 12 months when I moved here. Middle of 2013, I buy my first flip in Philadelphia. I wanted to have a go at flipping. I had my first time by my outside investors. It was actually my dad invested a little bit of money. Deal went to shit. And I I didn't lose my shirt. We didn't lose anyone's shirt. It just the contractor took longer. It sold really quickly, but I had to repay my dad and give him a return. And I came out of my own pocket on that. That was one lesson learned. Then I pivoted into multifamily syndication, knowing that I needed to up my game. And through strategic conversations with friends of mine, I realized I needed a mentor. And in early 2014, I got a mentor. And that is when I was able to really start to pivot and think for a bigger game. And that's when I started the podcast. That's when I started raising quote unquote money through building up a network. And over the last, so from 2014 to today, I have co-GP'd, I've started a podcast, I've written 2 books, and then I was able to go on my own and lead a syndication and start leading my own syndications in 2016, 17. And I just summarize that very quickly. But if you break it down into its parts, there's a lot that goes on in there in the beginning. Co-GP is really, really important. Starting a podcast was really, really important. Having a mentor to bounce ideas off is really, really important. Starting to talk to investors and create a platform in and around a podcast or a meetup or a newsletter or whatever that might be, really, really important. And then the biggest lesson, if I look back over time, is the consistency of doing it. I've been doing podcasting and podcasts, both mine and others, since 2014. So, and I talk about my story and I talk about the process and the transitions and the trials and tribulations, because that's what people need to hear. But it's also my coming to America story is my own story, and that thus people are attracted to it. I can raise money. For the money, I can go out and do deals. So there's a lot in there we can unpack. But the transition took a period of time. It wasn't just like, oh, Reed's done 3 deals in small multifamily in one flip, and all of a sudden he's doing $650 million. There was a big difference in there. There was moving to LA. There was changing careers. There was, trying to keep, the life together, roof over the head and be sane and all those sorts of things when you start a business. But eventually you get that first co-GP done, and it gives you a bit more confidence. You do the next co-GP. Okay, well, maybe I can start doing this on my own, and I need to start underwriting my own deals in certain markets. Okay, well, I need to build systems. There's just a lot of growth in and around that, and I could talk for hours on all those different stages to help people. Don't just hear, oh, $650 million. He went from 38,000 to 650. The end. No, there's so much more nuance in there that I can hopefully share with people about each step of the way and how people can go off and use that as advice to in their own business to start making progress towards a figure like $500 million under real estate under management.
I love that you shared more about what steps you focused on in your journey. I would like to talk a little bit more about that, because I want to understand what drove those decisions, right? You talked about co-GPing. You talked about launching the podcast. You talked about, going out and syndicating as the lead operator in your own deals. At what point did you know that was the right step to take? How did you make those decisions? Even hiring a mentor. I mean, what was that process like? And how did you know, hey, you know what the next step we need to do? We need to do this.
So the mentor one's easy. I've been pitched, and even in Australia, mentors. You go to those REIRs, and part of the REIRs and the investment clubs, there's a lot of pitching there, right? We've all been there. We've all been on the bus tours, and for me, I'd done a few of those little deals under my belt, and I was doing that flip, and I was like, look, I'm a structural engineer. I'm doing I do this for a living, and I still made a mistake, right? I still issues happened, and I was like, I need to get a coach, and I tried to delay it for as long as period as I could to getting a mentor or a coach, because I wanted to go out and try it myself. There's only so much you can read and hear and listen to and write and analyze before you go out and do deals. So I was learning by doing, but then I through some strategic conversations with some friends, it was like, I need someone in my court. So that was when I went out and I found the cheapest freaking dude I could, who's now a lot of money. We can mention his name or not, it doesn't really matter. But we're both going to his conference in Denver very, very soon. For those people listening, I think you all know who it is. But I was one of his second or third students, but I was very frugal because I didn't want to spend a lot of money. But I knew that spending that money was a bet on myself, right? It was, I'm taking myself seriously enough that I'm worth the bet. I'm worthy of taking my life to the next level. And I always knew that I wanted to be more, right? I just didn't know, at the time, I didn't know what that was, whether it's lead syndicator or, I didn't even know anything really about, syndication. I was just like, hey, this guy's doing it. I aspire to be him. Let's go out and be surrounded by him 24/7. So then from there, started the podcast. And the podcast really came out of like, well, hey, I've got a message to send to other people. I started really focusing on international investors in the beginning, but over the years, it's, most of my investors are American, but I knew I had to talk about my story. And through my story, I was going to be able to attract people who want to do business with me, whether it be through partnering, whether it be through just having good conversations with the guests that I was speaking to. And what I did notice, John, early on in my career was that if you hand someone a microphone and you're on stage, or, your credibility is quadrupled. And so having a podcast and early on in the podcasting sphere, it was a way to build credibility quickly when I didn't have a lot of credibility. I was interviewing other people about what they've done and saying, hey, listeners, look what this person's done. And that there became my own mentor over a period of time. And it's still going to this day. So a couple of steps in there about why I wanted to create, and you asked the question, back to the why. I was nervous when I first started my podcast. No one was going to listen to me, right? My mum and maybe my grandma, but I knew I had to put myself out there. The worst case is that I can it. It doesn't work. Okay, didn't work. But that's where we get so in our own heads about, I'm a structural engineer. I had no idea about building a brand. I had no idea about telling a story. I just started doing, and through doing it over a long period of time, you refine it, you become better at it, and thus I have something to share with someone. So that was really an important step. Now, I won't say that podcasting is the be all to end all, and you're going to raise the billions of dollars and you're going to fly off into the sunset. There's a lot of other stuff that goes on there, but it helps create a narrative and a brand around who I am, and thus people can trust me. So people always ask, why do you write a book or why do you do a podcast? It's to take 10 years worth of trust building and cram it into 2 or a year. And that is what helps build confidence in an investor to say, I want to invest in Reed Goossens, because when I go out and do my first deal, it's going to be my first deal, like my first syndication deal. And when I ask for money, I'm going to have to show some track record. I don't have a track record, but hey, got a mentor. I'm interviewing all these people. Like, I'm taking this seriously. I'm positioning myself to set myself up for success through all these actions that I'm taking. So that in itself will help people say, I trust him and I'm going to invest my money with him. So yeah.
Yeah, Reed, I think that's powerful, because a lot of people think about what they've done, the experience they have, and they don't give themselves credit for the other work. I mean, you talked about even when you were starting out, before you bought that 3 unit, you were educating yourself, right? Going to events, reading books, listening to podcasts. You're doing all these things to educate yourself. And that's harder to demonstrate to other people, right? Y'all, here's the experience I have. I've read 52 books. Not really going to cut it for most people, right? But it's real. It's real experience that you're gaining. And then you just have to put that in action. And to your point, creating something like a podcast, that allows you to continue that process. But now you're demonstrating that you are so committed to doing this thing and learning about it that you've launched this platform, and now you can share this experience with other people, and you're interviewing other individuals who are credible and experienced, and you're learning from their journey, and you're sharing this conversation. And ultimately, just like any other sponsorship or partnership, a little bit of their credibility is shared with you when they come on that show. Because if this individual took the time to sit down with Reed and spend 30 to 45 minutes of their time talking to you, well, guess what? They thought enough about you to sit in and talk to you for that time, just like a mentor or coach would do that. So you do get some of that credibility. And I think it helps a lot if you are trying to grow a brand. And I'm curious, just to go back, I want to make sure I understand. When you launched that show, you talked about sharing your story, but was your underlying goal really like to meet people and raise capital primarily, or was there something else you were trying to do with the show?
No, it first led with education, right? And through education, it was about my story and the trials and tribulations. You listen to the first 20 episodes of my podcast back in the day. Every single episode is a step-by-step, okay? And again, back in the day, it's not today, but back in the day, it was focused to the international investor, because in 2013, 14, it was really, really frothy for turnkey properties for overseas people. And I was like, look, this is what I'm learning about LLCs and setting up bank accounts and EINs and finding contractors and all this stuff. I'm boots on the ground, and I've got a weird accent. What other people might find this interesting. And so that it was a premeditative, step-by-step journey to show people over the first 20 episodes. Now we're 350 episodes deep. As I said, I get most of my investors are Americans, but it helped brand me as that person who I was trying to talk to international people, because I knew how hard it was coming as an international person trying to invest here. And again, that helped build a personal brand around who I am. That's pivoted over time, and it will always pivot. We can talk about that as well. But it was really in the beginning to start with education. And if it happened to turn out that some people invest with me, then fantastic. Today, I use it as a real lead generation for investors, for passive investors to come invest with me and really show what I've built, and really come from like, hey, this is what I built and this is how I built it. And these are the other experts that I'm getting on. We can actually have a really intelligent conversation about transitioning a property, increasing NOI by 30%, like playing at a bigger level and illustrating to people that, yeah, I was able to build that from nothing. And that's then more of an advertising for folks to come and say, okay, I want to invest with you.
No, I appreciate you clarifying that. And I think the thing that's really cool is you talked about sharing your story. And I've shared this the last time you came on the show, but for listeners who didn't hear that, Reed is actually, very responsible for me actually having this show, because we met at Best Ever the first year, and we sat and we talked about podcasting. And what was really interesting for me was I felt like I knew Reed. When I saw you, I felt like, oh, I know this guy. Hey, Reed. And I think I even said it to you like that. And you looked like, who the hell is this bozo, right?
My apologies.
And it's like, oh, that's right. He has no clue who I am, right? And that to me demonstrated the power of a podcast, because you can get your word out. People could get to know you. They can get comfortable with you, even if they've never met you. And I thought that was really powerful. And by the time we had a chance to actually sit and chat, the one thing you said to me that I thought was very powerful, and I mean, this was back in 2017 or 2018, I believe. And we were talking about the podcast, and you said, the world may not need another real estate podcast, but your network does. And the point of doing this is to share your story with the people in your circle. And that way you can grow your sphere of influence there. And then obviously it can grow and expand beyond that. So anyone who's considering launching a podcast or a blog or a meetup, yes, there are other events out there. There are other podcasts out there. But are you able to connect with the people in your circle and your network? They want to hear from you. They know you. They don't know these other people who are doing these things. And you have an opportunity to connect and engage with these individuals. And the words Reed gave me 4 years ago, I think are still true to this day. Even though there's way more podcasts out there and way more blogs out there, I think those words still reign true. Reed, we talked about the podcast and building up the brand. That first big syndication you did was the Joseph. Talk to me a little bit about that. I know you've gone full cycle on that deal. I'd love to just learn more about what that deal was like for you starting out, and kind of what lessons did you learn in holding and going full cycle on that deal.
Look, it was interesting, and we're talking about this in the green room before we press record. I just wrote an article about it, very quick, 5 bullet points. But actually, I forgot I wrote another article when we closed on the deal 5 years ago, which was actually 10 bullet points. And I talk about, very, creating relationships with brokers and all the, cliche stuff you write when you close on a deal. And I'll tell you today, John, even to this day, I look back and go, is that a blur? Is that a dream? Did I just come full cycle on a deal? Like you work so hard at something, and then you stop and you start reflecting on the lessons learned. And it's not until you actually write those lessons down that you have the ability to stop and take a breath and say, wow, I set out, I did what I set out to do. And I promised my investors I would give back them their money, and with a great return. And I did that. And I'm like, that's insane. Like when you stop to think about it, like back in the day, I was asking people to invest with me with no major experience as a lead syndicator prior to that. But they did. And they saw something in me. I don't know what it was, and my business partner. But now coming full cycle, the reward I get to prove to them, to prove to others that, hey, I'm the freaking real deal here. Not to boast myself up, but with this sort of self-talk, you go, is this going to work? Is this going to ever work? You build yourself up, and then when you come to actually executing, you're like, wow, I bought it full cycle. It's like still a pinching moment for me. I'm like, I just doubled people's money. that's insane. Like I didn't even think, again, going back to when I first moved here, I had no idea I'd be doing that. And it's really, it's quite rewarding personally. I feel really freaking fantastic that I was able to come full cycle because again, it goes back to as an operator, you really want to prove to your investors, and the way you grow in this business is by giving people a good return and being a good steward of their money. So that was the first real lesson, coming full cycle, just, hey, I can do it, investors. Hell yeah. And thank you for taking the trust in me back in the day. Here's your money back. Now let's do it again. That's probably the first lesson. The second lesson I learned was back in the day, I got fixed rate debt on the property. And we got fixed rate debt on the property through an agency loan. And back in 16, 17, if people don't remember, we're in a rising interest rate environment. And so we were able to get Freddie Mac out of the gate, which is really like the gold standard of multifamily financing, which was fantastic to attract investors. But what we did was said, okay, well, we think interest rates are going to the moon. Let's lock it. And we locked it at, I think, 4.4%. But we did it for 7 years, not knowing about defeasance or not really understanding about defeasance. And, we had a business plan of 3 to 5 years, but hey, we're going to slap this fixed rate debt on it and don't have a floating rate and all that sort of stuff. And so we could have exited the Joseph a lot sooner if we had a sort of more of a floating rate hedge. But on the flip side, back in the day, investors loved the fact that we had locked the rate. I didn't get to benefit from it over the last 24 months because interest rates are now in the threes. But back in the day, we were able to attract capital through that action. I wouldn't do it again. And I remember our debt broker saying to us, guys, all the big guys get floating rate interest with Freddie. They buy a cap. And we're like, oh, that sounds really, I don't know about that. Let's just do this one thing and we'll get to the next deal. And so that was sort of the second tip I learned. The third one was in and around managing the manager. We had to fire our property manager, the original property manager who we got on that property. We fired them about 12 months into the deal. And it was just more based on the fact that, think of it like, and I use the analogy in the article, and I talk about this, you make money when you buy, but you lose it through bad management, both property management and asset management. And so in the beginning, it was like buying your first car, right? You're going to go out, you have a ton of money. You don't really know what, car takes you from point A to point B. It was like property management. Like we did some research. They had some experience. They had about a 7,000 or 8,000 unit portfolio. So bigger than what that's a lot of units. You must have a lot of experience. But ultimately, it was like buying like a 1992 Nissan Altima, like your first car coming out of college, right? It got you from point A to point B. Steering worked, seatbelts worked, but it may not have all the bells and whistles. As we started to grow, we realized their company culture was directly impacting the type of talent that was showing up for jobs on our sites, right? And that really impacted how the success of our property was going to go. Was it going to go well or was it going to go bad? And through that, we realized that you actually have to pay a lot more attention to a company's culture than I first realized, because you want to be attracting the best talent to your properties. Property management is a thankless game. And having good property managers, good bums in seats in key positions, regional level, obviously the community level stuff, but having that good regional and back of house support to enable assets to grow, to enable portfolios to grow, to enable us to report to our investors in an efficient manner was really important. And that goes back to sort of my analogy to the car. That's when you get to a point where you're like, okay, well, this car's great, but it doesn't have air conditioning or it doesn't have central heating or seat warmers. And I started to need those little bells and whistles. And so over time, I needed to upgrade my car to a BMW, with all those little extra bits and pieces. Now, I paid more for the BMW, but I got to show it off to my investors, like, hey, we've got a bigger company. The company's got better systems, better culture, better track record, better attracting better talent, better back-end systems for us reporting to you guys. And that all matters because ultimately the success of your deal will be determined by how well you manage the asset and how well I managed my managers, right? So how well I manage them. And so again, having really empowering my property manager to run it as if they're an owner was really important, but also making sure that I'm on top of them, every single day, not on top of them in a bad way, but just like, hey, I'm watching, but also being self-aware enough that these guys have a lot of experience in the multifamily areas, so in the multifamily industry in a certain market. So I also need their opinion on stuff, and it's not my way or the highway. It's like, this is a collaborative environment that, yes, you're not my employee, but I pay you for my payroll on the property. So thus I've got to lead you and empower you to think like an entrepreneur. And that takes time to build up with a local team in any market. So yeah, they're just a couple of the lessons I've learned looking back over the last 5 years coming full cycle.
Man, I love what you just said. To recap it, one was really just the fact that people believed in you, that they trusted you to go out there and do this, that you let them, you went full cycle on this deal. That's a huge lesson learned right there, is that you got to have confidence in yourself, the work you're putting in, the things that you are doing, and go out there and execute. The second you talked about was the loan, making sure that you understand what loan product that you have. What's your exit plan? Do you have defeasance? Like, you have to understand all these things. And I think there's a great lesson there because, and I remember back at that time, all of us were really, I say all of us, meaning me, you, and other folks in our little circle. I think we were all thinking long-term debt, right? Like, get this long-term debt, lock in these interest rates, because if rates shoot up, who knows what's going to happen? But having a 7-year, 10-year loan was very attractive. And now, most people want to have that, 3-year bridge loan or flexible interest rate loan where they can adjust and be able to exit with no prepayment penalty. So I think it just comes down to, the model that you're looking at. And there are a lot of different ways to look at the deals and risk and all of that. But the third thing you said was on the property management. You use the car analogy. I don't know why you had to go from a 1992 to a brand new BMW. That seems like a huge difference. In
it was in 1992 to maybe a 2008.
All right. Either way, I think some great lessons there. What I will say though is that, most people don't know, like you said, when you're hiring a property manager for a project like this, most people are just hiring a PM. They don't know really what to look for. They look for some experience. They look for, maybe experience on similar properties, but they're not necessarily digging deep into systems and processes. If you could go back and ask a better question, a qualifying question to help you identify whether or not that property manager had the right culture and would be the right fit, what questions would you ask?
That is a good question for me to reflect on. I think it's more to do with, they had a good marketing strategy. Everyone has a good, it's yes. Yes. Of course I can do that. Yes, of course I can do this, Reed. Yes. It's not until you get into it and you see under the hood that you really realize. So I don't think any question would have changed my answer. I just now know more people in the industry, so I could go and lean on them to say, hey, is this property management company worth their salt? But back in the day, they were on, the Austin Business Journal's top 10 property management list. They were on we got some okay, recommendations from them. So it was like, okay, we'll give them a crack. And they seemed engaged. So we liked the people who were on the business development side. So I don't know if any of that could have changed. You just through actually go back to the action part again. It's through taking that action and getting into bed with them essentially, and seeing what under the hood and how their systems operated. And as we started to grow, we realized that car analogy, the 1992 Nissan Altima, wasn't going to go the distance. Thus, we needed to change, and that's okay. Like looking back on it now, if I go into a new market, I will get recommendations from people really, really quickly. But if something goes wrong, I can always pivot because I now have the confidence because I've gone through that once before.
I think the lesson there then sounds like, one, do your research, make sure they're qualified, right? They were still on that list. You said the top 10 list, they were getting referred by other investors. So they were qualified, but then once you get into it, you realize, hey, your style might be a little bit different or your preferences may be a little bit different. And just like any employee, right? You might hire an employee who on paper has the qualifications, they meet the description, they can do the job. But once you start working together, you realize, hey, you know what? Maybe not a great fit for the way we like to operate, or maybe it's not a great fit for the culture. And that happens. You get more knowledge, you get more information, and sometimes you have to adjust. And it's part of the business. If you have to change property managers, don't feel like it was a failure or you messed up hiring or anything like that. It's part of the business. Everyone goes through it. You try to build the best team you can with the information you have at that moment. And as you get new information, sometimes you have to make an adjustment. So sounds like you were able to do that, crush to Joseph. And congratulations for your leadership on that deal. Reed, just as you look for the rest of this year, what are your priorities? What are you focused on, and what can we expect from Reed out of 2022?
I think for me, it's all about growing the team and the right team. I'm fortunately, we're talking a little bit again in the green room, partnerships, and we can do another whole podcast on partnerships. But in the beginning, you partner up with people because you don't have a lot of money for employees, but you need to split the workload. Now it's about building out the team. I've got a couple of runs on the board. You've got a bit of cash in the bank. Go reinvest in the business and invest in people to help me fly and go at a better speed, at a faster speed, not in a bad way, but just at a different pace than what I have been going for the last 5 or 6 years, and get a little bit out of the day-to-day and let go of the vine, as they say. So for me, it's all about that. My goal this year is to close on another $100 million assets under management. So try and get that up to $750 million, and really try and pivot into some other markets that I've been keeping my eye on for a long period of time and been trying to build out here over the last 12 months. So yeah.
Love it. Well, Reed, we look forward to watching you as you continue to grow your portfolio and continue to listen to you as well. If you want to learn more about Reed and some of the projects he's got going on, you can check him out at his website, reedgoossens.com. That's ReedGoossens.com. Reed, we're going to go to our round of insights. Ready?
Let's do it.
All right. Give me a failure or an apparent failure that set you up for later success.
Apparent failure, drive-by shooting. First ever property. I bought that triplex, Section 8 housing. Nothing wrong with Section 8 housing. Just some of the tenants attract some other issues. And I didn't know that early on. But it helped me, that quote unquote failure, it sounds bad, but it wasn't. No one got hurt. We got rid of the problem tenant and we moved on down the road. But it was but it was my first deal. And some people would have said, oh gosh, this is way too much for me, and stopped. I'm glad I got to go through that early on, because it's not all roses and cherries. It is about, real life stuff happens, and how you react to that and how you become a problem solver is the sort of lesson learnt out of a bad situation, so to speak.
I probably shouldn't joke about this, but you said drive-by shooting, and I'm like, wait a minute, that was your failure? Like, are you telling me you were the gunman? Or
So I was
waiting to see where you were going to go with that. I was really confused for a second.
Yeah, no, it was the experience that probably my naivete around Section 8 and types of the tenants I was attracting in Section 8, that as a new investor, you hear that from your property manager and go, what the hell? You don't understand it like I do now.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you for giving us that clarification. All right, give me a digital or mobile resource you recommend for your business.
Slack's the easiest one. It's so good to have Slack. And I do like Smart Sheets as well, which is a sort of more project management type of just managing tasks and managing people.
What book have you recommended or gifted the most in the last year?
Key Person of Influence by Dan Priestley. I think it's a really important book that everyone should get their hands on. It's got nothing to do with real estate, but it's got everything to do with about that brand building we were talking about earlier, building that your KPI status in your niche, in your sphere of influence to keep growing it. So yeah, Dan Priestley, Key Person of Influence.
All right, give me your number one insight for multifamily investing.
Well, I think I'll give you two. One is always remember when you're starting out, a fool, and it's a quote from my dad, a fool and their money are easily parted, meaning be educated, understand what you're going to invest your money into, and go out and get educated, find resources. And we talk a lot about that at the beginning of the show about how I did that. The second thing is all about taking a bet on yourself. You'll get to a stage with your education, like I did, that I felt like I was getting to analysis paralysis, and I needed to take that next step. And it's going out and taking action. Well, that action can only be conjured up by the fact that you're saying, hey, Reed, or hey, John, I'm worthy of going out and taking a bet on myself. Because if you can't take a bet on yourself, who can you take a bet on? So, yeah.
What's a daily habit that helps you stay focused on your goals?
Meditation and working out every day.
All right, Reed, we know you're out in LA, great food town, lots of options there. Give me your favorite place to grab a bite to eat.
Ooh, favorite place right now. I would have to say there's a place called the Great White. It's like a great white shark. It's actually owned by Australians. It's a coffee shop, but it's in Venice. Great coffee. It's a bit of a shot in the arm from home. Meat pies, thick Canadian bacon type of style bacon, like all that good stuff. So if you're ever out in LA, check out Great White in Venice.
There you go. Listen, Reed, great information, man. Always a pleasure talking to you. I really enjoyed how you talked about your journey, really, coming to America with really a dream. We know you were really chasing a girl, but come here with a dream to get into real estate, build your portfolio, and then ultimately getting going with that, starting with that $38,000 investment in that 3-unit, starting to slowly scale that up, eventually moving into some co-GP deals, then leading your own operations. Fast forward to $650 million worth of real estate transactions under your belt. Really exciting information. And I like the fact that you also share some of those lessons learned and understanding that this is a journey. You will always need to educate yourself, but you also have to bet on yourself and start taking some risk and taking some action if you want to see this kind of result in your own business. Again, if anyone wants to catch up with Reed or reach out to him, check out his books, check out his podcast, just go to his website, reedgoossens.com. Reed, pleasure having you on the show again today. We hope you take care. See you again soon.
Thanks, mate.